Good evening, and welcome to Future Choices. My name is Fran Snedeker, and I am the producer and moderator of this educational series exploring reproductive health issues. We are filmed at the LMC TV studios in Mamaroneck, New York. Recently, Planned Parenthood Federation of America, in a press release by the Vice President of the Global, Latanya Mapp-Fred, commended Representative Nita Lowey on the introduction of the Global Democracy Promotion Act. She noted that this bill would once and for all bury the global gag rule and the harmful limits it once imposed. U.S. foreign aid should never be used as a tool to limit women's access to health care or impose unfair restrictions on the decision-making ability of independent organizations overseas. The women of the world need information and services, not censorship and restrictions. The Global Democracy Promotion Act was introduced in the U.S. House by Representative Lowey this past summer with 103 co-sponsors, including Representative Eliot Engel. Now, what is the Global Democracy Promotion Act, and what makes it so significant to Planned Parenthood and to us all? Future Choices is very pleased to welcome Latanya Mapp-Fred to provide answers to such questions. Latanya joined PPFA, Planned Parenthood, earlier this year, bringing to that institution a wealth of experience acquired in her decades of service with Peace Corps as a volunteer in Lesotho, with USAID, and with UNICEF. Throughout her career, she has maintained a special commitment to health and rights for women and young people. First as a child rights officer for UNICEF, and later on as USAID program director in several countries where her portfolio included health, HIV/AIDS, and education. Latanya has recently returned from a 6-week tour of Planned Parenthood's African field operations, during which time she spent a number of weeks in Kenya, where Planned Parenthood has had programming for many years. Latanya, welcome to Future Choices. Now, Latanya, back to my initial question. What is the Global Democracy Promotion Act, and why is it so important to us?
Fran, thank you, first of all, for allowing me to be here with you today. I'd like to talk about the Global Democracy Promotion Act because it is really an inspiring opportunity to try to get us to stop using the Foreign Assistance Act as a way to promote policies that are not legal in some countries and are legal in our country. So, for instance, there is the global gag rule, which you mentioned so rightly.
Okay, now give us some history on the global gag rule.
Sure. The global gag rule was a policy initiated during the Reagan years. Mm-hmm. It was a policy that basically restricted organizations that worked overseas from receiving U.S. government funds if they promoted, if they provided, if they referred abortion services to women in those countries. The difficulty with that kind of policy is that in the United States, we are allowed and we have a choice for abortion. It's legal here in certain circumstances. And in those countries, it's also legal in certain circumstances. But what that policy, the global gag rule policy, or the Mexico City policy as it's sometimes referred, did was said that something that was legal in that country we were providing funds to, and something that's legal in the United States was not going to be allowed under our Foreign Assistance Act. So organizations that did wonderful health care for women in situations where women were getting little or no health care could no longer receive U.S. government funds in a foreign assistance package to that country to do that kind of work any longer.
To do both the services and promotion of policies?
Even if they were doing promotion of, let's say, health care in a normal sense, and they just said to the woman, and in a normal circumstance, one of your options in an unplanned pregnancy situation is to end that pregnancy they would not be able to receive U.S. government service. Even if they never provided any kind of service, just saying that to the woman would disallow them from receiving those U.S. government funds. And this meant that a lot of clinics, particularly clinics that I've seen working in the field in Africa, all over Africa, but clinics that would have normally been eligible for funding from either directly the U.S. government or from U.S. government contracts and grants in that country were no longer able to receive those
And this
funds.
includes Planned Parenthood clinics?
This included Planned Parenthood clinics, and Planned Parenthood actually had started its international program. As you know, the Planned Parenthood program in the United States has been going for almost a century, but its international program actually started at the request of the U.S. government. When there started a USAID program for reproductive health overseas, naturally the U.S. government came to the largest reproductive health program in the United States to help them implement those services in different countries overseas. And so we had, in a partnership with the U.S. government, began doing programs in close to 100 countries over that time that we were working with them with the USAID grant. And we had been supporting local organizations and local advocates to promote women's rights and reproductive health in those countries. Many of the services that were provided under those grants stopped after the global gag rule was initiated. Planned Parenthood, as a moral and ethical stand, would not accept U.S. government money if we were not going to be allowed to provide it to organizations who were doing something legal in their country and legal in our country.
Now, take us with you to Kenya, where you were just spending some time, and tell us how the global gag rule impacted Kenya, and where the Global Democracy Promotion Act, how that would impact the Planned Parenthood's work in Kenya.
Let me just start off by saying that President Obama, after maybe not even a week into office, he signed a policy that said the global gag rule was no longer legal. So under this administration, under the President Obama administration, the global gag rule does not exist. So I want to state that first, because the effects of the global gag rule are significant, because they've been for some decades now in place and not in place and then in place again. So my remarks really about the effect of the global gag rule, I think, stems as much from that as anything. The confusion that many, both of our United States implementing organizations overseas, as well as organizations that have been hurt by the global gag rule that exist in the countries that we work in, and Kenya being one of them. So even now, and I'll start here, even now where the global gag rule is not a legally binding policy in the United States any longer, it still affects the way that foreign assistance is implemented, because many of the officers who don't necessarily know if someone will come in after President Obama and say to them, well, it's no longer legal for you to provide money to organizations who even refer abortions to women. They may be hesitant to start funding those organizations again, who have all along been doing what is quite normal for all of our healthcare institutions. But the Global Democracy Promotion Act, what it does is says that we'll never be able to do that again. It doesn't leave it to a president to have to say yes or no to the policy.
Oh, so that's what they mean by burying it.
Yes.
It's dead.
It cuts it completely, because now a new president who comes in inevitably won't have the choice to say it's in effect or it's not in effect. The Global Democracy Promotion Act, which I think again is a wonderful attempt by Nita Lowey, because of her understanding of what happens overseas associated with our U.S. government policies. I think it's been a wonderful attempt to stop that from happening, here or there, or for this country or that country. And so what it would do is actually say, well, if anything, not just abortion, is legal in the country that we're working in, let's just say in Kenya, and it's legal in the United States, we can't restrict any organization in that country from doing it, and it doesn't matter what it is. And so that way, I think you provide some consistency, you provide some long-term planning for development for the countries. And oftentimes we say at Planned Parenthood, and even in the development world generally, reproductive health, ensuring that women have their rights for reproductive health is ensuring that there's development for the country, that poverty will end, that education will increase, that healthcare will increase, and there'll be overall development for the country. So I think that that's a good example, the Global Gag Rule, of what the Global Democracy Promotion Act can do. It can stop those kind of harmful policies from hurting organizations on the ground in the countries that we all would like to see develop. But I think even beyond the Global Gag Rule, there's a very ethical and moral stand that I think Nita Lowey and her colleagues, 103 of them actually in Congress who signed this bill with her, have taken by saying that we no longer, as promoters of democracy in this country, can say to a country that they can't do something that's legal for them and legal for us. So it's important.
Now what has Planned Parenthood been doing in abortion in Kenya?
And let me tell you a little bit about Planned Parenthood Global. Our focus is in Africa and Latin America. And in the African countries, we're in Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Sudan, and now South Sudan, since the countries have split. And those are what we call focus countries. And the reason that we focused on those countries is we would like to have some impact on reducing maternal mortality. So our actual emphasis in being in those countries is because of the number of women who die from botched abortions. The percentage, I believe, not just for Kenya, but in Africa generally, is that 1 out of 4 women who die from pregnancy-related issues is from some abortion complication, whether it's at a quack that has done some kind of procedure that failed, or whether they're self-medicating or self-inducing their pregnancies.
1 out of 4, but
1 out of 4 of women who die from pregnancy-related activities. So for us, post-abortion care, preventing unskilled abortions are very important for us. It's a core part of the work that we do in Kenya and other countries. In some countries, and particularly in Kenya, what we do is we work with champions on the ground. And I call them champions because these are people who are very much committed to the rights of women in Kenya and in other countries in their region. And these people are trying to ensure that there's a policy environment as well as a service environment, but most likely a policy environment, that laws that won't restrict women from making these kind of choices. And so for Planned Parenthood, while we concentrate on service delivery, I think Kenya has been a really good example of where we're able to make a supportive program work for Kenyans themselves. And we've done that by working with an organization there called the Reproductive Health Rights Alliance. The Reproductive Rights Health Alliance was actually born out of the arrest of a doctor and his nurses for providing illegal abortions.
Now, when are we talking? In the 21st century, or how recently is this?
Yeah, this was maybe about a decade ago, so yeah, so very recent. And the doctor and his nurses were arrested and put in jail for almost a year. Well, they were accused of providing illegal abortions, and the actual, I believe the actual case that went to court found them not guilty of that. You are allowed.
And these are Kenyans.
These are Kenyans. These are Kenyans, and you are allowed in Kenya under their previous laws to terminate a pregnancy in for the life of the woman, for the life and health of the woman. Since that time, and because of that incident, there has been the birth of the Reproductive Health Rights Alliance, of which Planned Parenthood supports overseas. We provide them technical support, planning support, organizational development, and partnerships with other international NGOs to help them survive. And I'll talk a little bit later about our model of helping organizations overseas. But with the Reproductive Health Rights Alliance, I think the the strong partnership that we have with that organization is because of the networks that came together out of this arrest. So,
networks of Kenyan organizations?
Yes, networks of all Kenyan organizations. The first is a network of doctors, of OBGYNs, who came together in defense of their brother who was arrested. There's the network of nurses who did the same thing. And then there's the Federation of Women Lawyers who actually defended the case in court. And these three organizations, which are very strong organizations in their own right, came together specifically on reproductive health rights for women and have now existed for almost 10 years with the interest of creating a policy environment that's friendly towards women.
Now, that's a pretty gutsy thing for them to do when abortion is such a hot button issue in Kenya, isn't it?
And it continues to be a hot button issue. I mean, it continues to be a hot button issue here in the United States. But what I think has made them very successful is giving a voice to some of these issues. And the Kenyan constitutional debate, the recent debates on formulating a new constitution for Kenya, which finally came about after some time, was an opportune moment, I think, for the Reproductive Health Rights Alliance to provide that voice for Kenyan women. During those debates,
we're talking primarily the women with lesser financial, economic strength, with the poor women and the rural women, aren't we? Because do women in the sort of middle upper class in Kenya suffer from unsafe abortions?
Probably not. Yeah, probably not. There are. Not only are there actual providers in the country who can help them, but they also then have the means to go to other countries if they need to get a service that I think all women should have the choice to get.
Just like what we did before Roe v. Wade.
Exactly. But and it's the same situation, as a matter of fact. I mean, what happens is with women who don't have the means still make the choice. I mean, it's always been the choice of the women to end a pregnancy, but the choice now and the means by which they can go about ending the pregnancy are different and in many cases fatal. So their choices are then to go to an unskilled provider or to induce, as I said, themselves. And both usually land them in a public hospital, who then have to try to care for the post-abortion complications. And in many cases, they're unable to do that. And hence, you have the maternal mortality rates that we have in many countries, including Kenya.
Yeah, I read somewhere that 700 women die per day from unsafe abortion.
I don't know if it's that high because I think the number, well, it may be because I think the number is maybe about 320, close to 326,000 a year. So if you did the numbers, you might actually be right.
And just Kenya as one example. Latanya, you were saying, before I interrupted you, that the Planned Parenthood is intent on giving a voice to the women, a voice to do what?
I think, like Planned Parenthood generally, I'll talk about, has an interest in not getting to the point where women are having unplanned pregnancy. Our major focus is to work with women and give them options for family planning so they can decide on their own how to space their children. So many women in developing countries don't have those opportunities. And I think that part of the reason why there's a Planned Parenthood Global is to ensure that those choices for family planning exist all over the world for all women. And we've been working really hard in Planned Parenthood Global in the countries that we work in to ensure that the access to family planning is the most important thing that a woman, particularly a young woman, starting at adolescence, can have, that there is education. And one of the programs that we do in order to ensure that overseas is that we have a youth peer provider model, which we actually train, have extensive training of youth who will then go out and educate their peers in their schools, in their churches, in their mosques, and talk to them about family planning. And in many countries, we also then provide them with training where they can provide services to those same friends and peers, i.e. give them condoms, give them birth control pills, and refer them back to the clinics in which they directly work with. So that's just one of the models that we look at, but we are very, I think at Planned Parenthood, good at trying to look at what are best practice models for service delivery, to work with both health organizations but also non-health organizations to reach women who are marginalized and often don't get reached in the health system. So working with local development organizations, working with environmental organizations or agriculture organizations to make sure the option for family planning is one that women are educated about and that they have actual opportunities to get these services and commodities that they need.
So Planned Parenthood doesn't actually run clinics, but rather...
Not at all, yes.
Yeah.
We support organizations who want to ensure that women's rights and reproductive health rights in general are provided for.
And how does that support... Give me a picture of the support.
For instance, I can talk about one of our organizations, Carolina for Kibera in Kenya, which is an organization that was started by a gentleman on his a gentleman from North Carolina on his way to war. Met with a Kenyan woman in Kibera, which is a slum area right outside of Nairobi, a very large ghetto, we might call it here in the United States. And he met with a nurse
visit
there.
That several years ago when I was in Kenya.
And it's a wonderful program. Although it was kind of started out of this relationship between the service member and a nurse, it has actually grown into a wonderful local organization for healthcare that did not have, until Planned Parenthood approached them, a reproductive health component. And so with working together, we were actually allowed the opportunity to help them actually introduce this portfolio of reproductive health services into what they were doing in the Kibera slum. And so with that, we were introducing things like the youth peer provider model. We were introducing other family planning into their, so that they can HIV/AIDS. And so they have actually been a really classic example of the way that we do work. We find organizations that are already on the ground in the countries that they're in, and they're actually just looking for ways to introduce certain models that are going to enhance the lifestyle of the women that they work with. And reproductive health is usually a very popular one. So we don't hang our name on Carolina for Kibera. It's Carolina for Kibera. But what Planned Parenthood does do is we come in and we provide them opportunities to expand their services for women.
Their peer education is young men as well as
young women. And in fact, it's a very exciting thing, as you probably saw, to watch men talk about the opportunities for family planning and how to stop unwanted pregnancies in order to end poverty or the cycle of poverty with their peers, and how to increase the likelihood that you'll finish your education and that you'll begin doing livelihood activities very early in your career, instead of what is typical with the number of births that come about and how it thwarts your capacity.
So ultimately, the real end goal for Planned Parenthood in a program as in working with Carolina for Kibera or any of your other global programs is
to reach the healthiest generation all over the world. We don't want to stop just at the U.S. border. We know that there are special needs overseas, and we try to access them through our global program. But more than that, we want also Planned Parenthood network of community supporters to understand the international reproductive health issues as well, so that they can also promote that. And it's wonderful to be here today to talk about the Global Democracy Promotion Act, because I encourage people to go to PlannedParenthood.org/global and to sign on to the petition for that particular policy that Nita Lowy is trying to push, for the Congresswoman and all of her colleagues are trying to push. But in addition to that, to also remember that this Congress was also trying to defund UNFPA, which is the United Nations Population Fund, which actually provides, I think, the majority of family planning commodities for the world, particularly developing countries, but it also provides a great deal of sex education. It provides a great deal of, in general, reproductive health information for women in developing countries. And we have to be vigilant that defunding them is going to cause a great deal of these programs and services to stop in the countries where they need them most. And I think finally, as important, is that we understand as a body, of Americans, that what we do here in the United States affects so many people overseas directly. And I think it's what Nita Lowey was trying to do in presenting this bill, but to ensure to talk to our Congress people and make sure that they understand that we're not going to tolerate the cuts in funding that will not only hurt us here in the United States, but will also hurt health care for women overseas.
Excellent. So ultimately, then, what's the impact that Planned Parenthood has on these local organizations that you partner with?
That's a great question, Fran. And it's something that consumes me as the Vice President of International, because I want to make sure the support we give to organizations in Kenya and Nigeria and Ecuador and Peru and Guatemala, that these are going to be long-lasting inputs to those organizations. So we have a sustainability model, we call it, that we use to ensure that when we are finished funding an organization that we've worked with, even if we're funding it from startup, that organization can exist on its own. So what we do is a great deal of organizational development with them. In addition to service delivery and advocacy for reproductive health, we ensure that they're able to actually do things like have a board that will help manage the function of that particular local organization. We also make sure that they know how to raise funds on their own. One, by maybe selling things like the commodities, the family planning commodities, to make sure they have enough money to continue, but also how to write proposals to organizations. And so our rule of thumb is that after about 7 to 10 years, we graduate organizations. So like Carolina for Kabira, like the Reproductive Health Rights Alliance. And we say at the end of that time, that particular organization will be able to function on its own, and we can move on to other organizations in that country that need that kind of support.
Oh, that's terrific. LaTanya, I do want to thank you. You've given us some very compelling presentation of Planned Parenthood Federation of America's international program. As Nita says, few examples of U.S. foreign assistance provide benefits as tangible, cost-effective, life-saving, and critical for both the United States and the recipients as do international family planning and reproductive health services. Women and families across the developing world are healthier and stronger, and societies are more stable as a result of access to basic health services. And Planned Parenthood's work in Kenya is certainly an excellent example of just that. So, good friends and neighbors, now that we know how important it is that we all contact our congressional representatives to support funding for international family planning and reproductive health services, and to support the Global Democracy Promotion Act, now you know how important that it is that you do something. Pick up the phone, or my preference is to write a quick postcard and let them know what you think. What a terrific contribution you would thereby be making to saving women's lives, building democracy, and fostering world peace. Thank you, and good night.